We've been watching the Psalms for the past 25 years, for they seem to contain prophecies of end-time events. It is one of the most prophetic books in the entire Bible. David was a prophet, to be sure. And Gary and I have been looking at them ever since September of 1983 when we first came across this concept that the Psalms appeared to describe the last generation. We noticed, for example, in Psalm 1, what seemed to be the opening of the 20th century. And of course, the idea is the return of the Jews to their promised land under two motifs that were given, the replanting of the tree and the birth of the baby. Those are in Psalm 1. And we noticed that those were also repeated in Psalm 48, which of course leads us to the idea that the Psalms happen to be the 19th book of the Old Testament, counting from Genesis, but 48 books back from the end of the Bible, counting back from Revelation. And we question 1948. Is it possible that God has written within His Word even the very date for the birth of the baby and the replanting of the tree, which are both found in Psalm 48? And of course, we saw in Psalms 39 through 45 the atrocities of the Nazis, the Holocaust of the Jews. We have seen all these things, but when we came down to, let's say, Psalm 106, the end of the fourth book of the Psalms, and Psalm 107 through 150 constitutes the fifth book of the Psalter, we had to decide that, this Deuteronomy book, and by the way, these 5 books of the Psalms correspond to those 5 books of Moses. The Deuteronomy book is not chronological.
J.R., it doesn't seem to be chronological. However, just like Deuteronomy, it seems to be a sort of an encapsulation of all that went before, a kind of a review and not only a summary, but if you will, a kind of final statement about the disposition of the nations, about Israel's victory, about God's judgment, and so forth. Book 5, then, starting with Psalm 107, talks about the destruction of the world system, and we've talked about that many times before. And therefore, the theme is set. I guess you could say the general theme of judgment and reestablishment of Israel. And J.R., this is really exciting. This is the thing that we look for in prophecy because, like all Christians, we're very, very eager to see the end of days. I was thinking, you were talking about Psalm 48 a minute ago. We even find in Psalm 48 the expression, last generation.
Oh, yes.
Well, now that's clear. That's very clear.
Yep. The last generation evidently started in 1948 with the birth of the baby.
Apparently so.
The baby is Israel, and Israel's birth in 1948 constituted the last generation. Listen to Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 3. And it came to pass in the 40th year, in the 11th month, in the first day of the month, that Moses spake unto the children of Israel according to all that the Lord hath given him in commandment unto them. And after he had slain Sihon and so on and so on, Gary, it tells us that Deuteronomy was written in the 40th year. So here we have Psalms 107 through 150, and they are corresponding to the book of Deuteronomy, and we have arrived now at the 40th year, so to speak. And so here we have what may not be chronological, but it seems like the prophetic events in Psalms 107 through 150 speed up the world. We're certainly not going to play out to the year 2050. But I think within a few short years, all of the prophecies in these Psalms will come to pass. And we particularly want to look at Psalm 108 on today's prophecy in the news. And so, Gary, let's just dig into Psalm 108 and share what we have learned, especially verse 6, which says that thy beloved may be delivered. Now, I don't know if that's a picture of the rapture or not, but I want you to know that the New Testament Christianity is the bride of Christ. We are his beloved.
Well, the psalm is so absolutely beautiful. It's poetic, but it summons up images that are familiar to every Christian. Let me just read, "O God, my heart is fixed." This is 108, verse 1. "I will sing and give praise, even with my glory. Awake, psaltery and harp. I myself will awake early. I will praise thee, O Lord, among the people. I will sing praises unto thee among the nations. For thy mercy is great above the heavens. Thy truth reacheth unto the clouds. Be thou exalted, O God, above the heavens, and thy glory above all the earth." And here's this verse 6, "that thy beloved may be delivered." Wow. Now that's the, could that be, dare I say, the rapture of the church?
That's the culmination of all these verses. Notice he says, "I will awake early." Well, that sounds like the dawning of the seventh millennium.
Yes.
That's not just wake early in the morning at sunrise. We talk about resurrection morning. So it's indeed possible, Gary, that there is an allusion here to the rapture and resurrection of the New Testament Christianity. Furthermore, it goes on to say that once this takes place, this awakening early in the morning, on resurrection morning, "I'll praise thee, Lord, among the people. I will sing praises unto thee among the nations." Gary, when we all get to heaven, it's going to be a multinational group. And we're all going to be singing praises to God around the throne.
And that's true diversity there. Talk about diversity. Everyone who has ever received Christ by faith,
Yes,
regardless of color, culture, regardless of anything, status, wealth, all gathered together in a single body, and by the way, characterized by glory. And that's mentioned in this psalm.
yes. When David says, "I will sing praise among the nations," so there's got to be a group of people there from all nations. And then he says, "For thy mercy is great above the heavens, and thy truth reaches unto the clouds." Gary, do you remember in 1 Thessalonians 4, the dead in Christ shall rise first, then we which are alive remain shall be caught up together with the Lord in the air. We'll meet him in the clouds,
Well, as you were talking, I just opened my Bible to that, 1 Thessalonians 4:17, "Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds." Now that's pretty definite.
Yep.
That would be within the regime of the atmosphere. And the next phrase is, "to meet the Lord in the air." In other words, this is an event not in the heavens, but in the physical realm of the earth, in the atmosphere, shall we say, in our physical world. Well, guess what? Those are the words of David, too. Same identical thing. Because he mentions the mercy of the Lord being great above the heavens, and then he says, "and thy truth reacheth unto the clouds." So you have the two strata there, sort of coming together.
Now, we cannot tell you that this is the rapture of the church. I can tell you that the rabbis believe that the beloved is Israel. And that when David wrote this, he originally wrote it for Psalm 57. But he lifted these few verses out of Psalm 57 and put them in Psalm 108. In Psalm 57, he's referring to himself being saved from Saul, King Saul. But in Psalm 108, he's referring to national Israel. David is the epitome of Israel as a whole, being saved in the end of days from their enemies.
Now, J.R. has written an article for Prophecy in the News, and he includes quotes from a Jewish commentary called Tehillim, which is their word for the Psalms. And he quotes several of the authorities of Israel as they analyze this psalm from Israel's point of view. You've quoted a Rabbi David Kimchi here, who lived from 1160 to 1235, and I think this quote is really interesting.
Yes, he was affectionately known as Radek, 12th century rabbi born in southern France. And he explains that these verses refer to the fortunes of Israel as a whole. He says, in the future, the Messiah, Scion of David, will deliver Israel from exile and will lead the Jews in triumphant conquest of their enemies. This is found in the Tehillim Volume 2. And Gary, when David first writes these for Psalm 57, he has a verse which says, and that's just prior to what he's lifted out and put in Psalm 108, this introductory verse says, "They have prepared a net for my steps. My soul is bowed down. They have digged a pit before me. Into the midst whereof they are fallen themselves." Selah. So he puts the Selah in there as a pause, and he's going to lift the next verse out and deliver it to Psalm 108, which speaks of the end time. In this Psalm 57, he's referring to Saul. Saul has laid traps for him. He's laid a net. He dug a pit. But David succeeds in escaping that. And you know, basically though, prophetically speaking, Israel has fallen into, has been subjected to many traps, even in this generation.
Well, you could almost say that David, the person David, is emblematic of national Israel.
Yes.
Because the things that he went through in his own life were somewhat prophetic.
Yes. And so this prophetic trap here is something that the Antichrist is going to try to trick Israel into falling into. In fact, the whole world, when he offers this mark of the beast, he's going to say, well, it's to keep terrorists out, or, well, it's to help stabilize the economy, or some fancy glossed over reasons for it. But it's a trap to enslave the human race.
Now, we're talking here about Psalm 108, verse 6, "That thy beloved may be delivered, save with thy right hand and answer me." We were looking at it metaphorically as maybe a picture of the catching away of believers. But J.R., looking at it from Israel's point of view, if the beloved is Israel, "that thy beloved may be delivered, save with thy right hand and answer me." What happens after that in this psalm is really interesting, because the question must be asked, if you're going to achieve deliverance, from whom are you going to be delivered? Well,
Yes.
This psalm then waxes quite eloquent.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Now, I just want to mention this one more commentary by the rabbis. They said, when Saul's threat was finally removed, David's melancholy was dissolved and the full force of his unique personality burst forth. It says, David's soul now composed music to God, for it surged with renewed hope and vitality. This same description, the rabbis say, applies to the metamorphosis which Israel will undergo in the Messianic era after being redeemed from exile.
Wow.
So, this first half of the chapter deals with the Messianic era according to the rabbis. And then he gets into where the victory is. Listen to verse 7 and following. God has spoken in his holiness. I will rejoice. I'll divide Shechem and mete out the valley of Sukkot. Gilead is mine. Manasseh is mine. Ephraim also the strength of my head. Judah is my lawgiver. Moab my washpot. Over Edom will I cast out my shoe. Over Philistia will I triumph. Well, Gary, let's just look at that for a few moments. We start with Shechem. That's the valley between Mount Ebal to the north, Mount Gerizim to the south. The Arabs live there today.
Not only do they live there, it's been a base of operations for them. Remember when Yasser Arafat was alive? That was one of his bases of operation. And they have destroyed the tomb of Joseph that lies in that area.
And going across the Jordan River then, over into northern Jordan, he says, Gilead is mine. The valley of Sukkot lies over there. Manasseh is mine. Ephraim, the strength of my head. Moab is going on down then, past Ammon, Jordan. Moab is my washpot. Over Edom will I cast out my shoes. So that takes, in other words, Israel is going to occupy northern Jordan and southern Jordan. And Philistia, or the Gaza Strip area, says, over Philistia will I triumph. So, Gary, basically, when the tribulation period comes, Israel is going to win this battle of Gog and Magog. Israel will be in control of the heartland of Israel, which today they're trying to set up a Palestinian state.
Right.
Northern Jordan, southern Jordan, far south Jordan, which is Edom, Gaza Strip, all of the area that the Palestinians have claimed, Israel's going to be in complete charge of.
This is amazing. And right in the middle of this list of enemies, we find this little 4-word phrase, Judah is my lawgiver.
Yes.
Right in the middle of those enemies falling by God's decree, Judah is my lawgiver. You know, that would be in Hebrew Yehuda, and that would include, I think that would speak of the latter-day gathering of all the 12 tribes. Mm-hmm. Because today they are called the Yehudim, or the Jews.
Yes.
And so the Jews, is what this is saying, are God's lawgiver. What could that mean? Mm-hmm. He is the judge, they are the lawgiver.
And you know, the prophecy of the dying Jacob, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh comes. Yeah. So the Jews are saying this is the Messianic era.
Yes.
The Messiah has come. He is in charge. He is the lawgiver. He set up his government in Jerusalem, and Israel is in charge of all of these areas that once belonged to Palestine, to the Palestinians, or Arabs, so to speak.
Now, if this isn't prophecy, I don't know what is. I mean, and of course, the Jews themselves, and you can gauge this from the quote that J.R. just read a moment ago, the Jews themselves regard the Psalms as prophecy. They regard it as latter-day prophecy. They regard it as messianic prophecy. And so we're really looking at relevant, pertinent thoughts here. Now we're getting into some interesting new details in Psalm 108. We have talked about deliverance. We've looked a bit at the territory to be delivered. These would be the territories through which Israel is under oppression today, including Shechem and Sukkot, Gilead, Manasseh, Ephraim. But Moab and Edom are mentioned. And J.R., there's something fascinating here, because verse 9 says, Moab is my washpot, over Edom will I cast out my shoe, over Philistia will I triumph. The next verse, verse 10 says, who will bring me into the strong city? Who will lead me into Edom? Edom is mentioned again here.
Mm-hmm. And the strong city, of course, of Edom, the only one it could be, is Petra.
Right.
So there's a possibility here. This is alluding to the fleeing at the abomination of desolation and the holding up for the last 3.5 years of the tribulation period by Israel, awaiting the coming of the Messiah.
Yes.
So it all seems to be fitting within these verses. I can't tell you that they are chronological, but I'll tell you, Gary, it's really interesting to see what is mentioned here.
And the Jews have a saying, which is it can be very perplexing when you first hear it. They say that Edom is Rome. In fact, I've seen it written in Jewish literature, yes. Edom is Rome and Rome is Edom. What does that mean? If you really look at the origins of Edom, it started back with Esau. Great struggle between Jacob and Esau. Edom became the Idumeans, who are best known for the Herodian dynasty at the time of Christ. The Idumeans were very, very friendly with the royal houses of Rome, and they intermarried, and they sort of went off together and lived happily ever after the diaspora, AD 135. And so the Jews think of Edom genetically as having merged with Rome, and therefore a kind of a prophetic progenitor of latter-day prophecy. Now, in my opinion, that's not a bad idea. Mm-hmm. It works.
Yes. Something else I want you to notice here. Not all the tribes are mentioned. Ephraim, Manasseh, and Judah. That's it.
Yeah.
Now, these are the three royal tribes. Ephraim and Manasseh, of course, were the twin sons of, or at least the sons of Joseph.
Yes.
And Joseph, of course, is the great Messiah of the book of Genesis. He's the one who saved the Jews from the 7 years of drought and famine and brought them down into Egypt and gave them the land of Goshen. Ephraim and Manasseh were his sons, and they were regarded by Jacob as part of the tribes of Israel. And so here we have Ephraim and Manasseh and Judah, the three royal tribes. And they are listed here because symbolically they represent all the tribes, basically.
So here we have the deliverance of, shall we say, Hebrew or Jewish royalty from the evils of a world system. And a strong city is mentioned here. Where is that strong city? A lot of opinions have been given about where the Jews will hide in the tribulation. Actually, J.R., the Bible would not disclose such a thing. If it gave it away, their hiding place would be exposed.
Yes. When it says in verse 11, "Will not thou, O God, who hast cast us off, and will not thou, O God, go forth with our hosts?" So this is explaining that God drove the Jews from their land, but watched over them all through the centuries and brought them back in the end time.
Right.
And brought the Messiah to set up the Messianic Kingdom.
And verse 12 then says, "Give us help from trouble, for vain is the help of man." You know, as you might say, if you were a pastor of a church, you might look at that and say, "Now that will preach."
Yeah.
You could easily do 45 minutes on that verse alone, because think of all the men who have tried to help Israel in the last 100 years. Go back to Lord Balfour and the British and people who have said, "Oh, we're going to help you, just trust us." And they never did. Israel has tried to trust the West, and it has never worked.
Yeah, well, look at Israel today. They are between a rock and a hard place, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because we're trying to give away their heartland, their Temple Mount, their city of Jerusalem.
Yes.
America, the great bastion of freedom, trying to give away Jerusalem. It's amazing to me.
It is.
Israel has been have actually suffered at the hands of their friends.
They have. And J.R., that verse also says, "Give us help from trouble." You know, that reminds me of what Jeremiah said. Jeremiah 31, when he described the time of Jacob's trouble.
Yes.
Tribulation.
And the final verse, "Through God we shall do valiantly, for he it is that shall tread down our enemies." And there it is. This psalm is a compendium of events that describe the whole 7-year tribulation period. It would be nice to think that we are the beloved and that we'll be taken out before it all starts. That would be great, wouldn't
it, though?
And we cannot tell you that Psalm 108 will be fulfilled in 2008 because we are on record as saying that the chronology stops with 2006 or Psalm 106. But we have seen some interesting things in Psalm 107, Psalm 108, and all of these seem to swirl around the end time events. Gary, they must surely be upon us.
Absolutely. Now, we have just a little teaser here at the end of our broadcast. The next psalm, Psalm 109, is a curse. In fact, it is one of the most, if not the most, detailed and abysmally dark curses in the entire Bible. And it's a curse against a wicked man. Now, J.R., when we think of a wicked man, we think of the Antichrist, invariably.
And when our Lord comes, he's going to put the Antichrist on trial, and Satan as well. "Set thou a wicked man over him, and let Satan stand at his right hand." They're both going to be in that courtroom. They're both going to be on trial.
They are.
When the Lord comes back. And he's going to throw Satan into the bottomless pit and the Antichrist into the lake of fire.
So here we have a cluster of prophecies that are all gathered around the ideas that we think of when we read the book of Revelation. When Christians look at Revelation, they see the summation of things. They see the rise and fall of the Antichrist. These things are all written right back here in the Psalms.
So here we are in the year 2008. We are awaiting the next shoe to drop.
Yes.
We are looking at the powder keg of the Middle East, knowing that Syria is trying to go to war with Israel, trying every machination possible, being rearmed to the teeth. We know that the Hezbollah and the Hamas refuse to negotiate with Israel. Israel is going to face Jacob's trouble. Be assured of that. There will be no peace in the Middle East. We're looking into the future for at least 7 years, knowing that Israel is going to suffer. So if you don't know Christ as your personal Savior, you need to trust Him today. Get born again. He's coming soon. This is J.R. Church and Gary Stearman. Until next time, keep looking up.